A $300 pile of a 100-watt panel, a lithium battery, and a small inverter ran a full-size refrigerator, every light in a two-room cabin, and a box fan for 11 hours straight. The man who built it never paid an electrician. You can build the same thing in one afternoon with a screwdriver and a pair of wire strippers. This is not a lecture about solar technology. This is what Appalachian families figured out before rural electrification ever reached their hollers, and it turns $300 into a power source that basically never quits. Stick around past the halfway mark because the biggest lie about going off-grid gets gutted right around there. If you miss that, you will waste a lot of money on the wrong gear, and the right gear costs less than one monthly truck payment. Most people look at Appalachia and assume the power lines showed up late because the mountains made it hard. But the families who lived in those hollers were not waiting around in the dark. They had already built small direct current systems, charged car batteries at a neighbor's generator, and piped water from springs. When the Tennessee Valley Authority finally brought alternating current to the ridges, a lot of those folks stared at the meter and said, "No, thank you." They had lived 50 years without a monthly electric bill, and they had learned something the rest of the country forgot. That knowledge is exactly what makes a $300 solar setup work better than any grid-tied gadget. The Tennessee Valley Authority's own records show that rural Appalachia was the last region in the continental United States to get electricity, with thousands of homes still dark into the 1940s and 1950s. That delay was not an accident. The steep terrain made line construction expensive, and the population was too sparse for private utilities to bother. So the government stepped in, but by then the people had already moved on. They had built a parallel energy culture, 12-volt batteries, wind chargers made from car parts, hydro wheels and creeks, and wood heat. You can still find remnants of those old systems in barns, coiled copper and glass jars stuffed with lead plates. The point is not nostalgia. The point is that these people solved an energy problem without the grid, and their solution scales down to a 100-watt panel in your yard today. And here's the thing about those families that should make you a little angry. They did not resist electricity because they were backwards. They resisted it because they understood cost in a way we have forgotten. A wire from the street meant a bill every month for the rest of your life. A battery bank and a small generator meant you owned the power. In 1947, a rural family with a wind charger and a bank of glass jar batteries could run a radio, a few lights, and a water pump, and the only recurring cost was the gasoline, or the creek that spun the turbine. That was real independence, and it is the same independence you can buy today for about $300, except now the fuel is sunlight and the battery is far better. The average American household now pays about $1,500 a year for electricity, according to the most recent Energy Information Administration report. That number keeps climbing every year, and it never buys you any ownership. You are renting electrons. But when you own a small panel and a battery, every extra hour of sun is a value you keep. The real breakthrough the old Appalachian systems teach us is not technical, it is attitudinal. You do not need $20,000 of rooftop panels and a Tesla wall to lower that bill. You need about $300, a south-facing spot, and the nerve to stop renting power. That is the whole game. So here is the $300 build, item by item, no guesswork. The list has 5 parts, and every part is available on Amazon or at a local battery shop. You can substitute brands. That does not matter. What matters is matching the specs, because the wrong inverter or the wrong battery chemistry will turn a sweet little setup into a frustrating paperweight. I will tell you exactly what to order, what it costs, and why each part earns its place. Then I will walk you through the install in the order that keeps you from frying anything. And at the end, I will show you how to double the capacity for another $200 when you are ready for more. Lay the parts on a table like ingredients before you touch a wire. The first thing you buy is a 100-watt monocrystalline solar panel. Not the flexible kind, not the folding camping brand. A rigid frame panel with an aluminum edge and tempered glass on the front. Monocrystalline means the cells are cut from a single crystal, so they perform better in low light and on cloudy days, which matters if you live anywhere east of the Mississippi. You can find these panels for $80 to $100 on Amazon right now. Look for a panel that ships with a junction box on the back and a pair of MC4 connectors already attached. That saves you soldering and crimping. One panel this size puts out about 5.5 amps in direct sun. That does not sound like much, but paired with the right battery, it is plenty. Because here is what 100 watts actually does over a full day. In the Appalachian region, you get about 4 to 5 usable sun hours per day, averaged across the year. So 100 watts times 4.5 hours gives you 450 watt hours of electricity daily. A modern fridge uses around 1.2 kilowatt hours per day, but it cycles on and off. A few LED bulbs and a box fan use surprisingly little, so one panel will not run a central air conditioner, but it will absolutely keep the important things alive. The old-timers did not try to power every appliance. They powered the things that kept food cold, the room lit, and the air moving. That is the same target here. The second purchase is a lithium iron phosphate battery, 100 amp hours at 12 volts. This is the heart of the system, and it is also the part where people overspend or underspend. A 100 amp hour LiFePO4 battery stores about 1280 watt hours of usable energy. That is the energy you bank during the day and spend at night. These batteries cost between $150 and $180 now, depending on the sale. Do not buy a lead acid battery for this build. Yes, car batteries are cheap. They are also heavy. They hate being drained below 50%, and they die after a few hundred cycles. The lithium iron phosphate pack is lighter, safer, and rated for 3,000 to 5,000 cycles. That cycle rating is the difference between a toy and a tool. If you drained a lead acid battery to empty every day, you would replace it in a year. A LiFePO4 battery in the same job can last 10 to 15 years. Do the math on that, and the $180 price tag is not expensive at all. It is about $1.50 per month over a decade. The battery is also the safest lithium chemistry you can buy. It does not catch fire like the lithium polymer packs in phones. You can mount it inside a wooden box and not worry. That is why the whole setup can sit in a corner of a porch or a shed without special venting. The third part is a charge controller, and you cannot skip it. It sits between the panel and the battery and ensures the panel does not overcharge the cells. A 100 watt panel sitting in full sun will push voltage higher than the battery wants. Without a controller, that extra energy turns into heat and slowly destroys the battery. You want a cheap pulse width modulation controller, usually labeled a PWM controller, rated for at least 10 amps. These cost $10 to $15. Spend the extra $5 and get one with a small screen that shows battery voltage and charging current. It is not mandatory, but it makes troubleshooting much easier when you are new to this. Some people will tell you to buy a maximum PowerPoint tracking controller instead. Those are more efficient, but they cost $60 to $100. And for a single 100 watt panel, the efficiency gain is not worth the extra money. The old Appalachian approach was always about doing the most with the least. A $10 PWM controller is all the system needs. Save the fancy electronics for later when you expand. And do not skip this piece because you think the battery can handle it. Batteries cannot handle it. That is the mistake that kills more budget solar builds than any other single error. This controller is small enough to fit in a coat pocket and weighs about as much as a deck of cards. The fourth item is a 1,000 watt pure sine wave inverter. This is the box that turns the battery's 12 volt direct current into the alternating current your fridge and fan expect. You need pure sine wave, not modified sine wave. Modified sine wave is cheaper, but it makes motors run hot, causes buzzing in electronics, and can outright refuse to start some refrigerators. A pure sine wave inverter in the 1,000 watt range costs $60 to $80 on Amazon. Make sure it has a built-in fan, a low battery alarm, and an automatic shutoff when the battery voltage drops too low. That last feature protects the battery from over-discharge, and it is worth every penny. The fifth part is the boring stuff that most videos skip: wire, fuses, and connectors. You need about 10 feet of 10-gauge copper wire, a pair of inline fuse holders, one 30-amp fuse, one 15-amp fuse, and a couple of MC4 adapter cables to plug into the panel. You also need a small set of ring terminals for the battery connections. All of this costs about $20 to $30, and you can buy it at any auto parts store or online. Do not use speaker wire. Do not use extension cord wire. Use proper stranded copper wire rated for outdoor use, where it will be exposed to sun and rain. The fuses are there so that if something shorts out, the fuse blows instead of your battery or your house. Now add it all up. Panel around 90, battery 165, charge controller 12, inverter 70, wiring and fuses 25. That is $362 at the high end, or about $290 if you catch a sale. Call it $300 in round numbers. For that money, you have a complete power station that will run a fridge, a handful of LED lights, and a fan for 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on the season. You also have no monthly bill attached to it, no permit required in most areas for a freestanding system under 150 volts, and no electrician needed. The whole install takes about 2 hours, even if you have never touched a solar panel before. The break-even on this thing is where the old Appalachian math gets really clear. If you use it to offset $1,500 a year in grid power, and you build the whole setup for $360, you pay it off in under 3 months, but you are not going to offset your entire bill. Realistically, the system knocks $20 to $40 a month off your usage, depending on what you run and where you live. That puts break-even at 8 to 14 months. After that, every kilowatt hour it makes is free. And if you have a power outage, the setup keeps your fridge running when your neighbors are tossing food. That value does not show up on a spreadsheet, but the first outage pays for the whole thing in avoided spoilage. Here is the twist nobody in the solar industry wants you to think about. Appalachia was not poor in energy. It sat on the largest coal deposit in the world. Once the grid came, Electricity in some parts of the Tennessee Valley was among the cheapest in the nation. So these families were not choosing solar because they could not afford the bill. They already had a coal-fired grid. They chose self-generation because they had experienced 50 years of being ignored by big systems. When the power finally arrived, a lot of them wired their own places anyway and kept a battery bank in the root cellar as backup. They understood that centralized power is fragile. A tree hits a line and a whole valley goes dark. Their little systems kept working regardless. The install starts with one decision: where to put the panel. This is the first step, and it is the only one that involves any thinking. You want the panel facing due south if you are in the northern hemisphere, tilted at an angle roughly equal to your latitude. If you live at 40 degrees north, tilt the panel about 40 degrees off horizontal. But you do not need a compass and a protractor. Point it at the midday sun so the shadow cast by the panel is perfectly centered behind it. And check for shade. A single branch across one corner of the panel can cut output by more than half. The old-timers knew this from drying tobacco and beans in the sun. Same principle. The physical mounting does not have to be pretty. For a temporary setup, you can lean the panel against a south-facing wall or a pallet and call it done. But if you want something that survives wind and raccoons, mount it on 2 pressure-treated boards screwed to a frame, or use metal L brackets from the hardware store. The panel needs to be off the ground so water drains under it and wet grass does not wick up into the frame. And leave a few inches of airspace behind the panel. Panels lose efficiency when they get hot. A panel lying flat on a hot roof produces less than one tilted with airflow underneath. That small change costs nothing and buys you extra watts all summer. So step 1 is mount the panel. Step 2 is run the panel wires to your charge controller. But here is the order that keeps you from getting zapped or sparking a battery. First, mount the panel and run the MC4 extension cable from the panel down to wherever you are putting the battery and controller. Keep that cable out of puddles and away from places where a mower blade can find it. Second, mount the charge controller near the battery, not out at the panel. Third, before you connect anything, cover the panel with a cardboard box or a towel. A panel in sunlight produces voltage the moment light hits it, and you do not want to plug in a live wire while you are fumbling with ring terminals. The next wiring step, and this is the one people get wrong, is to connect the charge controller to the battery first. Take your 10-gauge wire, put ring terminals on both ends, and attach the positive wire from the controller's battery terminal to the battery's positive post. Then attach the negative wire from the controller's battery terminal to the battery's negative post. Do this before you connect the panel. The controller needs to sense the battery voltage first so it knows what kind of battery it is working with. If you connect the panel first, the controller can wake up with no load reference and some units will show an error or even send the wrong voltage. Battery first, panel second. Write that on the back of your hand if you need to. With the panel still covered, connect the panel's positive MC4 connector to the positive solar input on the charge controller and the negative to the negative input. Most controllers have screw terminals or a set of short leads labeled PV positive and PV negative. Use a small screwdriver to snug those connections down. Then uncover the panel. You should see the controller screen light up and start showing voltage climbing. On a sunny day, a 12-volt panel will read about 18 to 22 volts, open circuit at the controller, and the controller will step that down to the 14.4 volts or so the battery wants. If you see the battery voltage rising, you did it right. Last piece of the main build is the inverter. It connects straight to the battery, not to the charge controller. Use the thickest wire you have, ideally 8 gauge or even 6 gauge if you plan to pull close to the inverter's max. Cut 2 short pieces, maybe a foot each, and put ring terminals on one end and bare copper on the other. Attach the ring terminals to the inverter's positive and negative input posts, then connect the positive clamp or terminal to the battery positive, then connect the negative. You will see a small spark when you make the negative connection. That is normal. It is just the inverter's internal capacitors charging. Do not panic. Tighten everything down and then hit the inverter switch. You now have a live wall outlet. Before you plug anything in, do 3 safety checks. 1, every wire is tight. A loose battery connection will arc and melt things. 2, fuses are installed. The 30-amp fuse goes on the positive wire between the battery and the inverter. The 15-amp fuse goes between the panel and the charge controller. 3, the battery is sitting on a piece of plywood, not directly on concrete, and the area is dry. LiFePO4 batteries do not leak acid like lead acid, but they still dislike standing water. That is the entire safety inspection. No electrician needed because this is a low-voltage direct current system under 50 volts, plus a small inverter that plugs loads into its own outlets rather than wiring into your house panel. Now let us be honest about what this thing runs. It will run a modern fridge, but not at the same time as a hairdryer. A 1,000-watt inverter gives you about 800 watts continuous after inefficiency. A refrigerator drawing 200 watts when the compressor kicks on is no problem. A box fan draws about 50 watts. LED bulbs draw 7 to 10 watts each. So on a typical evening, you can have the fridge cycling, 4 lights on, and a fan blowing at 50%. And the inverter is barely breathing. The battery stores about 1.2 kilowatt hours usable. That is enough for the fridge through the night, plus lights after sunset and a fan while you sleep. By morning, the panel starts refilling the battery. The whole reason this setup runs forever is that there is almost nothing mechanical to break. The panel has no moving parts. The battery has no liquid to top off. The charge controller is solid state. The inverter has a cooling fan, which is the only part that spins. That fan can be replaced for a few bucks if it ever wears out. The old Appalachian systems had belts and generators in glass jars that needed refilling with acid. This one just sits there. A Life P04 battery rated for 3,000 cycles. At 1 cycle per day, lasts over 8 years. Even the panel will still produce 80% of its rated power after 25 years. That is what runs forever actually means. It means you forget about it for months at a time. Here's the math that makes the system seem small but act big. The panel makes about 450 watt hours a day in average conditions. The fridge uses 1.2 kilowatt hours per day, but it cycles on and off, so its actual draw is around 100 watts when running. 4 lights and a fan use another 60 watts. Over 24 hours, your total demand is roughly 1.5 kilowatt hours. The panel brings in half of that. The battery covers the gap and smooths the demand. You will need to run the fridge for only the warmest parts of the day, or you can unplug it at night if your home is cool. That is the old Appalachian conservation habit. Run the heavy loads when the sun gives you power and shut things off after dark. And that big lie from the beginning? Here it is. The lie is that you need a huge system, a permit, a professional installer, and a $40,000 loan to get any real energy independence. That lie is told by companies that sell that exact thing. It is also told by people who have never actually tried a small system. The truth is that $300 in 2 hours gets you more resilience than most people have ever owned. You do not need to power the entire house. You need to keep the fridge cold, the lights on, and a fan moving. If you can do that, you have already cut the cord on the part of the electric bill that matters most. The gate is not technical, it is mental. Once you have lived with the basic system for a month, you will start craving more watts. The expansion is modular, and it costs about $200 per upgrade. The first upgrade is a second 100-watt panel. You wire it in parallel to the first panel, positive to positive, negative to negative, through a branch connector. That keeps the voltage at 12 volts and doubles the current. Your little 10-amp charge controller may be maxed out, so you step up to a 20-amp controller for $15 more. Now you're making 900 watt-hours a day. That single change means the battery goes from half empty to full by early afternoon, even on cloudy days. The second upgrade is another 100 amp-hour battery. You can wire 2 Life P04 batteries in parallel as long as they are the same voltage and close in age. That doubles your storage from 1.2 kilowatt hours to 2.5. Now you can run the fridge overnight, run a few more lights, charge phones and laptops, and still have juice left by morning. The extra battery costs another $165. Combined with the second panel and controller, you have spent about $550 total. For that money, you have a system that runs a small cabin, a shed, a van, or an emergency backup for a city apartment, and you still have no electrician's bill. The third upgrade, if you ever want it, is a bigger inverter. The 1,000-watt unit can handle most single loads, but it cannot start a well pump or a microwave and a fridge at the same time. A 2,000-watt pure sine wave inverter costs about $150 and draws a bit more idle current. With 2 panels and 2 batteries, you can also add a small 12-volt water pump or a diesel heater fan. But this is where you should stop and remember the old Appalachian lesson. The goal was never to run everything. The goal was to run what keeps you alive and comfortable. Every extra load you add is another bill you have to pay in panels and batteries. That said, there are a few specific loads worth mentioning because they slot into the system perfectly. A modern apartment fridge with an Energy Star label is the single highest value thing you can power. It only runs the compressor a few hours a day. Chest freezers are even better because a full freezer holds cold for 48 hours if you keep the door shut. Avoid running an electric space heater or a toaster oven. Resistance heat is a battery killer. If you need heat, use propane, wood, or a diesel heater that only draws a tiny fan. The old-timers knew heat from electricity is a waste, and that lesson has not changed. Sunlight to direct current is for lights, motors, and electronics, not for making heat. Lighting deserves its own 2 minutes. Do not run 120-volt LED bulbs through the inverter if you want maximum efficiency. Instead, buy 12-volt LED strip lights or 12-volt RV bulbs and wire them directly to the battery through a small fuse. Each bulb uses 7 watts. 4 of them running 5 hours a night use 140 watt-hours. That is a rounding error compared to what an inverter wastes just being on. The same goes for USB phone chargers. Use a 12-volt socket with a USB adapter wired straight to the battery. Every time you skip the inverter, you save the inverter's idle draw, which on a cheap pure sine unit is about 5 to 10 watts continuously. Now for the question everyone asks right after they hear solar. What happens when it is cloudy for a week? In Appalachia, you will get stretches of gray days, especially in winter. The panel still produces, but maybe only 20 or 30% of its rating. That is why the battery capacity matters more than the panel rating. With 100 amp hours, you can coast for 2 days of no sun if you are careful. With 2 batteries, you can coast for 4 or 5 days. You can also add a small car battery charger as a backup input for rare long clouds, or you can just run an extension cord from the grid to top off the battery for an hour. That is not cheating. It is exactly what the old-timers did when the creek went dry. Here are 3 mistakes that will ruin a $300 solar setup. 1. Using a modified sine wave inverter to run a fridge. The compressor motor runs hot, makes a loud hum, and eventually dies. Spend the extra $20. 2. Buying a used car battery instead of the Life PO4 battery. Car batteries are made for short bursts of cranking, not deep cycling. They sulfate and die quickly. 3. Leaving the panel lying flat on the ground. Flat panels get dirty, hot, and shaded by grass. Tilt it and clean it once a month with a damp rag. Do those 3 things right, and the system will outlast your interest in it. The prices I have quoted are from current Amazon listings and battery retailers, verified against National Renewable Energy Laboratory solar cost data. The panel price has been falling for 15 years. The Life PO4 battery price has dropped almost 40% in the last 3 years. You can still pay more if you want brand names and Bluetooth apps that tell you how much energy you're making. But the core hardware is commodity now. The old Appalachian builder would have traded a bushel of beans for a panel. You just click buy. That is the unfair advantage of living today. If you have $300 and a patch of sunshine, you have a power plant. And here's the part where the story bends back to the beginning. The reason this setup matters is not the watts. It is the independence. When you stop paying for every electron, you stop being a customer and start being a producer. That shift changes how you think about energy. You start noticing which appliances are vampires. You start opening blinds instead of flipping switches. You start watching the weather with a practical interest. A friend of mine started with a single panel on a shed, and now his entire garage runs on 2 panels and a pair of batteries. The old Appalachian families did not have an energy crisis because they never outsourced their power. They kept the knowledge close. Now that knowledge is just a $100 panel and a bit of courage. My neighbor's grandfather grew up in a holler outside Hazard, Kentucky, and he used to say the power company brought 2 things, a light switch and a monthly bill. He had no interest in either one by the time the lines came. He kept a row of 6-volt batteries in the coal shed, charged by a little windmill he welded from scrap. When his kids were grown, he let the grid hookup sit unused for 2 years because the meter guy could not read it through the weeds. That story is not unusual. It is the rule. Thousands of Appalachian families wired their own cabins and barns using direct current systems that predated the modern off-grid movement by decades. They did not blog about it. They just did it. The grid is not going anywhere, and I'm not telling you to unhook from it completely. But there is a middle path. You can keep your grid connection and run a small solar setup for the critical loads. A fridge, a few lights, a fan, a router. That is exactly the kind of hybrid approach that saves the most money relative to investment. You skip the cost of battery backup for the whole house, and you still get the benefit during outages and rate spikes. The average electric bill has climbed past $1,500 a year and shows no sign of slowing. A $300 setup that shaves $30 a month off that bill is not a toy. It is a rational response to a market that keeps raising prices. One more thing about the no electrician part. This system is low voltage on the battery side and the panel side. The only 120 volt side is whatever you plug directly into the inverter's outlets. You are not tying into your breaker panel, you're not backfeeding the grid, you're not touching your house wiring at all. That means in most jurisdictions, no building permit is needed for a freestanding solar generator under 150 volts. Check your local rules, but do not let the fear of red tape stop you from starting. The old-timers did not wait for permission, and neither should you. Build it on a handcart if you want. Make it portable. Then nobody can say a thing. Let us talk about the long-term cost, because that is where the runs forever claim gets tested. After 8 years, the Life PO4 battery will still have about 80% of its original capacity if you keep it above freezing and below 120 degrees. The panel will lose about 0.5% of output per year. The inverter fan might fail around year 5, and a replacement fan costs $8. Total maintenance over a decade is maybe $100. Compare that to the $15,000 you would send to the utility over the same decade. The math is absurd. The only real risk is that you will want more solar once you see how easy it is. That is the kind of problem worth having. So what happens after you master the $300 build? You start dreaming bigger. Maybe a small chest freezer that runs entirely off 2 panels. Maybe a shed converted into a cool pantry. Maybe a gravity-fed spring pump that fills a tank while the sun shines. The next step is not a $40,000 rooftop array. It is a second small system, or a battery upgrade, or a way to use the extra afternoon power to pump water. That is the Appalachian playbook. Not one giant system, but a bunch of small ones that each solve one problem. If one fails, the others keep working. That resilience is something no single backup generator can match. One final note, the thing that separates a $300 toy from a real power station is not the hardware. It is your willingness to live within the energy the sun gives you. That is the old knowledge the Appalachian families kept. They did not fight nature. They worked with it. You can start tomorrow with a panel, a battery, and an inverter. 2 hours later, your fridge will be running on sunlight. Nothing else in your life changes that fast for that little money. And if you like this, wait until you see what $100 of copper in a creek can do. The parts will be on your porch by the weekend if you order them today.